So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is a map that was in one of the map packs. Well, it's in the complete version of the map packs, of course, but I believe it's called GALADHOR, which suggests it's from sort of one of the more western map packs, which is quite interesting. But this is going to be a free-for-all, and actually I think this map in particular for a free-for-all is very well suited actually, because there's a lot going on it. I feel like this is one of those sort of maps where if you play like a 4v4 on it, one side will probably get the objectively nicer areas to deploy in. It could work for a siege as well though, actually. I feel as though this sort of moat all the way around this encampment, I feel as though potentially, maybe not so much for a 5v3 because of the size that we're dealing with here, but a 4v4 it could work out very nicely as well. But this is going to be a free-for-all. Done a lot of free-for-alls actually lately, after a very dry spell of free-for-alls, interestingly enough, and it's like you wait for a bus for ages, and then all of a sudden many come along at once, as they say. And this, I was initially in this recording session going to start off by doing Sin's New Siege, but while I remember, I feel as though this one needs to be dealt with quickly, because this is the one where apparently Corrigan was aggressive. And is this him? No, that's Clitarti. Corrigan is way over there playing as Angmar. I mean, Angmar, if you're going to be aggressive, Angmar is one of the factions to do it with, because they're really very friendly to a player that rushes, I would suggest. But we'll get on to Corrigan and his army and what he's going to do or not do soon. But this is one of the shorter battles, so again, just sort of easing my way into a long recording session on this fine Saturday morning. As yeah, I mean, obviously I'm going to be doing a long siege of Sins almost directly after this, and then maybe another one as well if I've got time before I head out a little bit later on. So yeah, just a nice 15k frames, and based on that length, it does suggest to me that all the players are going to be reasonably aggressive, which I do very much approve of. The player who sent this one to me was Galudithon. I believe it was him who sent it to me. It was either him or Artorius. It must have been Agalar. Again, very similar names, so they do tend to blend in with one another. This is, of course, on the regular build. But I know this because here, as we can see, playing as Umbar. Very nice faction. I do very much like Umbar. He's got the Alcarondas Faithful here, but I feel as though quite a lot of people will be quite pleased to hear that both the Alcarondas Faithful and the Arathurim of Dol Amroth, the sort of low numbers knight units, will be just made regular knights, so they will be sort of brought up to the same amount of unit models as other knights are, which I do approve of, to be honest with you, because it makes, in particular, the Arathurim much less useful, but even the Alcarondas Faithful as well. They're supposed to be really scary melee cavalry, and if they were to be the same size as other melee cav, they would be able to mix it alongside the likes of the Witch Realm Inquisitors and the Haven Knights, but as it is, they just can't, because they've got 10 less men, which is a huge number for a bodyguard unit. At least 10 less men, depending on the unit scaling. But yeah, Alcarondas Faithful, very nice unit of melee knights to have roaming around in a free-for-all like this, because you can defend your back lines, you can engage with cavalry. Umbar's problem does tend to be a lack of cavalry numbers, but what numbers they do have are very high quality, because of course the currently full-strength knight unit that they do have is going to be the Warlords of Umbar. The Lance Knights, obviously, Lance Knights are really a devastating force on the field, because they're not easy to kill in melee. Outside of melee knights and the high-tier wargs, like, everything else is really going to struggle to deal with a unit of lance-wielding knights, but more so than that as well, like, they're going to do so much damage off the charge, and that's one of the things that, considering Umbar's infantry quality as well, if you get good hammer and anvil with Umbar, you know you're doing something right. It'll be interesting to see if you can do that in a free-for-all though, because obviously you can't just focus on one direction in a free-for-all. You do need to divide your attention at least a little bit most of the time. Belagair archers without the armor upgrade here. So actually Belagair units, their base armor is not all that impressive, especially not when you don't upgrade them. But of course the main event is the fact that they have that shield value as well, which definitely helps to offset that. And they're not very expensive either, so as a skirmish archer, of course, they're very, very effective. And in a free-for-all like this, it does often help to have a unit like this just as a sort of safety net, as it were. If you do need to get involved in a bit of a long skirmish fight with one faction while defending yourself from another, it's always nice to have a unit like this which can withstand a bit of punishment. Alcarondas Legion though, Umbar, of course, the main thing that they are going to be focused on is their heavy units, and in particular their heavy infantry. Alcarondas Legion are really, really good in melee like this. Like, if you compare them to something like the Ravenna Legion, or Ravenna Abarim I should say, that are kind of one of the other high-tier line-up units like this, the Alcarondas Legion have got higher melee defense than them, less damage, but honestly I prefer having the melee defense, especially when you mix it in with the other things that Umbar have got. Like, line infantry for me, I do prefer them to have higher defensive stats, just because for the most part I don't expect my line infantry to do damage. It's always nice, and obviously the Alcarondas Legion can, because of how expensive they are relative to other line infantry units. But for me, the most important thing about line infantry units is their ability to stay alive for long enough for me to do something else. It's very rare that I would suggest line infantry is going to win you the battle through outright damage. Outside of factions like Umbar, Numenor and Imladris and the like, they're really going to struggle to do that for you, which is worth saying. But men-at-arms units as well, in the upcoming cold fix, as it was dubbed, are going to be made a little bit more handy in melee, less all about holding the enemy in place for a long period of time. Corsair crossbows, who are hidden, a very good unit to have, just because they can hide, which means their main weakness, of course, is the fact that they're very light on armour. So if archers do manage to get them in their sights, they will fall pretty quickly. Very much a glass cannon, the Corsair crossbows, because they can do a lot of damage with those harpoons that they shoot from their crossbows. But the fact that they can hide does mean that if you just stop them moving and allow them to hide, they can't be skirmished with. It's one of the main ways that Mirkwood managed to avoid being in a skirmish fight that they don't want to take. And it's one of the ways you can defend your Corsair crossbowmen as well, but you do need to be sort of on the ball with that, because they won't hide instantly when they stop moving, so you definitely need to take into account if you get them too close to an archer line. Likelihood is they are going to be focused by at least 1 or 2 volleys by the time they start to hide again. Naru Aru Sentinels, again, a really nice unit to have in the mix, because obviously alongside the Alcarondas Legion it makes Umbar's front line relatively small in terms of number, but in terms of quality, very few factions are going to want to go toe-to-toe with an Umbar force that is this expensive. Armour upgraded Balaketh Axeguard. In comparison to the other heavy axemen, their higher melee defense does make them a little bit more handy in melee, especially when they upgrade the armour. The Balaketh units are going to have their base armour raised in the cold fix, just to make them a little bit more of an attractive proposition to bring. Personally, I actually quite like the Balaketh Axeguard, but I definitely agree that the shield bearers need a little bit of something to make them more of a viable option, because for Umbar, like, if you want AP, you'll bring the Axeguard, and if you want a line infantry unit, you'll bring the Alcarondas Legion, and if you want a mix of both, you're not going to bring the shield bearers, you're just going to bring both of these units. And yeah, I feel as though the Mace Men do need a little bit of something, but the Axeguard will be made a little bit better. Shock infantry in general is going to be made a little bit better in the cold fix as well, though, so that's not too surprising to see the Axeguard increased in effectiveness a little bit. Harbingers of Castamere is going to be where Castamere is as well. Heavy swordsmen like this, of course, really, really strong. And bodyguard swordsmen like this are going to be brought more into line in terms of price with sword and board bodyguard units as well, just to make them a little bit more commonplace. Like, bringing them, if you can get them into melee, they're obviously very powerful, but one of the problems that you'll see with them is they're very expensive, so they really do cut into your ability to spend elsewhere, especially in a very expensive faction already like Umbar. And the Adunheim Shield Guard, of course, the locked morale Black Numenorian spears on the flank. Now I think it's time we go through Corrigan's army, because the assertion with this replay was that he was aggressive, which I find really difficult to believe. Corrigan's tactics are usually very bizarre and very distinct to him, and aggression is the exact opposite of what he usually does. But we'll see. I mean, Angmar is definitely a faction that if you want to be aggressive with, you can do so without fear of falling apart too quickly if you do it wrong. Guardians of Kharndoom, who are over here on the front line, obviously a very tough and sturdy unit of line infantry. Not quite as damaging or as devastating as something like the Alcarondas Legion we just saw, but in comparison to a lot of sword and board units, they really are very effective. We've got some Angmar halberds just in behind them. Nice cheap phalanx unit with AP. We have the ever dangerous Witch Realm Blackguard, obviously sitting in the middle of the Angmar army. Very, very strong unit indeed for a sword and board. You really have to go into the Dwarven factions before you find a unit that is better than them at that. Witch Realm Inquisitors as well. So obviously they're higher numbers. Actually, they only have 5 on this unit scale. They only have 5 more than the Alcarondas Faithful, but at this level of unit, like 5 unit models is going to be absolutely key if the two meet in a 1v1 vacuum. Witch Realm Inquisitors are just the stronger unit at the moment, one of the strongest melee knights in the game. And then some pikemen at the back, so he clearly has a lot of hidden units, which suggests to me a largely lower tier Angmar force. There's going to be some Orc Fellas, I would imagine, Snaga Stalkers, Snaga Archers, Goblin Trackers, maybe some Goblin Band. Interesting idea indeed. Usually people who play Angmar like to dip into the higher quality, but Angmar can go very numbers heavy. You don't see it very often, but I think maybe that's what Corrigan has done, which will be interesting to see if that plus Corrigan aggression yields results here. We shall see. Then we have Sigma Cyphers, who's going to be playing as Dale. I mean, his plan in this battle is quite obvious. He doesn't want to be aggressive because he's posted up on this hill that was in his deployment zone, and as Dale, that is a very tempting thing to do because of the amount of archers they have. Even more so in the next patch, like one of the main changes to Dale, in addition to making the sword masters of the human factions just a little bit more effective overall, is going to be the fact that they can bring their archers in higher numbers. Because at the moment, the Dalian bowmen and the Bardian marksmen, in order to bring a full Dalian skirmish line, you have to go to the max on each of them. They're going to relax the limits on that a little bit to make it so that you can be a little bit more free with the exact composition of archers you want to bring. And it does make sense, obviously, for Dale to bring archers in great quantities, because that's what they're all about, really. Even though at the high end they only have a couple of options in the Royal Guard and the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Dalian Paladins are back there, obviously a really nice unit of AP shock infantry as well. You know, that I hear some people say they are a little bit underwhelming, and I guess considering how they look, how thick their armour looks, and how massive their weapon is, I suppose that's true. But you have to say that they are relatively, they perform almost exactly the same as something like Tharbad Warhammers, so I mean, can't be that bad. Dalian Bowmen up here. We have some civilians, more civilians, lots of fodder to get in the way of these choke points. Lake Town Infantry are going to have their ammunition increased in the next patch as well, just to make them a little bit more of a presence at range. Barding Herd, Morroquendi bows. I'm not sure. I think they'll still have the Morroquendi in the next patch. I think, anyway. I mean, we glossed over that when I was talking to Kuro, but I think they still have them. I think that's still an ongoing debate, actually. Dalian Spearmen, Morroquendi pikes back here, and then finally, bit of mobility as well. Earls of Dale, more melee cavalry, so a lot of melee cavalry on display today, but of course they are no match for either the Alcaron Das Faithful or the Witch Realm Inquisitors. And then finally, in the encampment itself, we have Clatati playing as Mordor. All of his army is very much visible. Moranon archers, Orc javelins, Olag High. Lots of numbers, but that's more expected from Mordor than Angmar. Orc maulers, of course, nice, very cheap AP units, which, you know, shock infantry, like the shock infantry that's sort of 500 to 1,000 is where, like, well, I say 600 to 1,000, we'll say, is where, like, the buff needed to happen for the cold fix. But cheap shock infantry like this, the Orc Maulers in the current patch, has been very effective because it's so cheap you don't care if they die. But also they do a decent amount of damage, especially the AP versions with, like, the Orc Maulers. Like, they can be surprisingly effective, which is why they're here, obviously. Moranon infantry, Orc fodder. We have some Orc javelins as well. Sauron's Will, very spread out army. There's Temple Executioners with the armor upgrade, obviously very nice. Sword Bodyguard, heavy swordsman. Melkor's Chosen, so another unit of technically melee cavalry. Probably the most damaging melee cavalry on the field today as well, although defensively I would say the Witch Realm Inquisitors are slightly the better of the two units. But there's no doubting that the Melkor's Chosen will deal more damage in melee, so it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top if we see them fight one another. Orc archers, Orc fodder on the front line, Moranon archers as well, some troll drummers to make sure that these lower end units, the Moranon and the Orc fodders, stay in melee for as long as possible. But without further ado, let's begin. The long recording session of today begins. A little interesting makeshift fortification out here. This is a map that it would be kind of neat to see. It's interesting though, I think this sort of fortification outside, it's more of sort of something that the attackers would build to besiege the encampment, more so than something the defenders would have outside of it, these sort of two positions to besiege the internals. But yeah, it would be interesting to see this map again in like a 4v4 siege situation, I think. But yeah, you can see over here, yeah, we can see that Corrigan's army has already sort of revealed itself en masse. Goblin Trackers, Barrow Wights, another unit that I always forget about in the current patch, because they aren't brought as often. They are a unit that can hide, so I do need to keep that in mind, really. Goblin Trackers, Snaga Archers. I have to say, this isn't particularly aggressive from Corrigan at the moment. He's going in the exact opposite direction of his quarry. But we'll see. There's time. There's time in this battle. Because Umbar, I think, are going to catch up eventually, especially seeing as the Barrow Wights are so slow that if Umbar wants to defeat them as they sort of lag behind the rest of the army, I'm sure they will be able to do so. Mordor are coming out though, which is good to see. Clatati's going to move forward, maybe try to occupy this outer fortification here, put himself right in the middle of everything, and even if all three gang up on him from here, it's a pretty decent position to defend. I mean, if I were in this battle and I was in the free-for-all, I would be looking at Dale and I would be trying to rally all of the other players against Dale, because there's no way I'd let a player get away with this, or at least try not to let the player get away with this. It's posting up on a hill as Dale with all your archers, very comfortable, pitching your tent. No, 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 no. Never something I would allow to stand. In come Umbar's knights. Alcaron Das Faithful, and to be fair, the Warlords of Umbar, because of all the melee cavalry on display today, they may not be feeling that confident. But I would say that in terms of killing power, the Warlords of Umbar are by far and away the most deadly unit of knights on the field today. Nice charge there into the Barrow Wights. Alcarondas faithful doing the same in the background there. And yeah, I mean, the Barrow-wights are lagging far too far away. Like, this is the thing, like, Corrigan is trying to retreat, and the Barrow-wights are far too slow to do this, so he's just going to have to accept that these guys are going to be sacrificed to the gods at this point. Oof, a sandwich charge between the Warlords and the Alcarondas faithful. That's going to be a devastating charge, that is. Alcarondas faithful may not be anywhere near as devastating as the Warlords on the charge, but when you get pinned between the two of them, that's going to be nasty. And the Barrow-wights, I mean, they're standing up to this sort of punishment better than most units would, as you would expect from what is effectively a melee tar pit. But they're still getting devastated here every time this cavalry charges in, and they're just sort of accepting their fate at this point. None of the Umbar cavalry has fallen yet either. The Barrow-wights are fairly slow at dealing damage after all. They need to be in a fight for a long time before they start picking up a kill count. And cavalry like this is absolutely not going to allow that to happen. The Shaman Inquisitors are charging forward. I mean, this is maybe a little bit of a change of pace. They're running away from Umbar, taking damage while they do so, but they're going to be super aggressive against Mordor, and Mordor's army is spread out, to be honest, so this is the right thing to do. I mean, Mordor, they're not in a good position to sort of withstand a bunch of aggression. I mean, this is something for the ages. Corrigan is moving towards his opponent. This may be the first time I've seen such a thing. Unfortunately, his cavalry is getting stuck on the rock. And now the Orc fodder is probably going to kill off a couple of the Witchraven Inquisitors, which is most unfortunate, but the geography of the map proving to be a bit of an issue. The Melkor's Chosen did arrive a little bit late. Not really worthwhile for the Witchraven Inquisitors to lose any models on the Orc fodder, to be honest with you. In comes Angmar, though. Orc fellas moving forward, and the Olag High won't want to be sort of getting bogged down by a bunch of Orc fellas. But Corrigan needs to keep his entire army moving. Going to be interesting to see. I mean, especially at the lower tier, Mordor and Angmar's units are going to tend to blend together quite heavily, I would imagine. There's a lot of archers firing away as well. Morannon archers, Witchraven pikemen are moving in. I mean, he is being aggressive, Corrigan. I never thought I'd see the day. And the Witchraven Inquisitors have, I don't know where the Melkor's Chosen have gone, but they've abandoned their post. And the Witchraven Inquisitors do get a charge into the Morannon archers, but the Melkor's Chosen are going to get in there now. And yeah, in terms of damage, the Melkor's Chosen are better than the Witchraven Inquisitors, and the Inquisitors have already taken some losses, so that fight is only going to head in one direction. Going to go down to half speed for the moment. This one unit of Orc fodder is not going to be able to withstand this huge Angmar force that is pouring forwards now. The Witchraven Inquisitors are holding this flank all on their lonesome, but against Morannon infantry, that's going to be an easy task, to be honest with you, and the Javelins are too close, actually, to do any damage to the Witchraven Blackguard. I think I called them Inquisitors just then, but no matter. But yeah, I mean, this is very similar sort of philosophies from both factions here. I think both of them have dipped quite heavily into their lower tier units, going for sort of more efficient units like Maulers and Fellers. But as a result, I think they're both going to just sort of slam into one another and just sort of slaughter each other en masse. I can't really see much else happening. I think actually neither side has had an ideal start to the engagement. I think Mordor's first units in were completely overwhelmed here by this charge, but Angmar have also left a few of their units a little bit overextended. Mordor's reinforcements are arriving. I actually back Angmar to win this though, because I think Mordor, they're not taking this threat seriously enough. Too many of their units are over here, perhaps sort of guarding against any sort of flanking manoeuvre from Dale over there, which is fair enough, I suppose, but if you don't commit everything to deal with a full Angmar charge, regardless of whether they've gone quality or quantity, you're going to be in trouble. And you can see here the Witchraven Inquisitors once again just diving deeply into the line. But once again, much like the Melkor's Chosen previously, they're going to come on under assault from the Olag High, which is not really where cavalry wants to be unless they can get a clean charge on them. Melkor's Chosen are going to do the same here. They're going to try and get in behind enemy lines, and they're going to succeed. Corrigan's not used to being aggressive, so he may not be used to guarding his backlines while he does so. Snarger archers are not the biggest loss, to be fair. The Witchraven pikemen are a little bit slow. So yeah, the Melkor's Chosen are here, and unfortunately for the Witchraven pikemen, they're going to get recharged by the Sauron's Will. If they can't get their phalanx pointing in the right direction, those large serrated axes are going to really take their toll on the Witchraven pikemen, unfortunately for Corrigan. But I really want Corrigan to win here, because I don't want him to lose and then get put off being aggressive forever. Surely he, if he is successful against Mordor in this rush, he will see the light. Orc Maulers are here. I mean, the Orc Archers are also, well, Morannon Archers are trying to do some damage, which considering the amount of halberdiers and axemen that are in the Angmar army, for once, sustained arrow fire is probably going to be extremely effective against them. Most of the time, Angmar are very well positioned to deal with this sort of thing, with a lot of Guardians of Khan Doom. Their Witch Realm units also tend to be heavily armoured as well, but stuff like Snaga and Orkfellas and Angmar Halberdiers are most certainly not. I mean, the problem that Angmar have here is they are kind of bottled up, and they're not really able to smash Mordor into smithereens. And Mordor is starting to sort of get in and around them, which is unfortunate for Corrigan. I feel as though he may be in a little bit of trouble, but salvation may be on the way. Because Dale sees, I think, an opportunity to take advantage of the situation for himself. He has moved off his hill over there, but he's going to sort of claim this fortification out here, which I think Mordor was originally aiming to try and take. But he's going to be able to get his archers up onto these stone walls, and he will probably be able to shoot into the back of Mordor's position over here, which may give Corrigan a little bit of relief. There's still Barrow-wights alive over here, which is impressive. I mean, it does go to show how resilient the Barrow-wights really are, but the Alcarons as faithful are taking care of them. All of this, though, does play into Umbar and Dale's hands. The Orc factions slaughtering one another means that their manpower is largely untouched for the time being. But I feel as though Umbar and Dale are going to be the ones that come into contact with one another more so than anything else. Dale may very well shoot into the back of Mordor a little bit, but I feel as though with Umbar advancing, Dale will probably want to set themselves up to meet that advance from the high ground, I was going to say. Orkfellas are in here, the Olag High here. To be fair, against Orkfellas, Olag High will not have that comfortable of a time. There's more Mordor forces wrapping around the edge now. Yeah, Mordor have almost completely surrounded Corrigan at this point, which is not great for him, because he doesn't have the resilient units that would be really good in this situation, and unfortunately for Corrigan as well. Like, I feel as though this is his... what Corrigan will tend to do is bring a lot of archers to sort of engage in his weird layered strategy with hidden units. And I feel as though this is kind of a holdover from that. If he was going to be aggressive, this is too many archers for me. Like 2 Snaga archers, well 3 Snaga archers actually, as well as a unit of Goblin trackers. I feel as though it's too much. Like, they're not going to be useful. You need more men on the front line if you're going to be aggressive like this. And unfortunately as well, like, far too quickly these archers had their position compromised by cavalry, by infantry. And I feel as though Corrigan, unfortunately for him, he may have been aggressive for the first time, but I don't feel as though it's going to pay off for him. To be fair, these Melkor's Chosen have been charging in and out against the Witch Realm Pikemen and been taking a lot of losses doing so. They're going to win here. They're going to destroy these Witch Realm Pikemen, but the Melkor's Chosen are going to be gone. I think the problem Clatati is probably feeling at this point is he does probably feel... Well, Moran on infantry breaking there. It's not great for them. Another unit of Olag High. 2 units of Olag High on the field from Clatati. That's a big investment there. I feel as though Clatati will probably be feeling at this point, I feel as though I'm going to win, but I feel as though it's going to cost me an awful lot to sort of seal the deal here. Will I have enough left to face off against the human factions later on in the battle? And there's still quite a lot of Angmar to chop their way through, to be honest with you, including the Witch Realm Blackguard, who are going to reposition themselves here to go after the Orc Javelins, who are managing to shoot right into the centre mass of the Angmar blob, which is not good for them. The Melkor's Chosen are still running around. The Javelins, of course, will be mopped up by even a depleted unit of Blackguard, but that's by the by, really. Over here, meanwhile, Dale have transitioned all of their units at this point off the original hill, and now they're getting into this smaller, but no less fortified hill. But Aguilar is here, and Dale is still trying to set up, so if Aguilar can sort of set himself here, start shooting into the Dalian position, but most importantly, I think, engage in melee. Umbar's army is not big enough to withstand a lot of arrow fire for too long. Even if a lot of their units are resilient, they don't have the manpower to take losses at range for too long. They need to get into melee, they need to start showing their quality there, and in addition to that, using their crossbows. Because the Dalian Bowmen and the Dalian Royal Guard and the Black Shots, to be fair, are going to be far too strong in that sort of situation. Dale, though, interestingly enough, are actually setting up, I think, to try and go after Mordor. I mean, the civilians came over here right from the off, so I'm not sure whether this is a wise decision from Dale, because Umbar is going to be attacking them. I mean, I suppose what Dale is hoping for is that this sort of narrow engagement will favour them. A long skirmish against Umbar's smaller army will go Dale's way, is what they're hoping for, I think. All the while, they can start filtering off units to try and help out against Mordor, because I think it's fairly clear at this point that Mordor, if Angmar are unsupported, Angmar will lose this fight and Mordor will have units left over, and Dale, being the one in between Mordor and Umbar, will be sandwiched. So it's a good amount of foresight, I suppose, from Dale to try and be a little bit more proactive instead of just focusing on one. And it does also make it a genuine free-for-all, rather than just two 1v1s. Olag Kai, meanwhile, on the front line. Witch Round Pikemen, they're being overwhelmed here, though. Against trolls and against infantry that has managed to sort of compromise their phalanx, that's never a good thing. Orc fellas running from the field. All of the archer line at this point is in full retreat. Flatati's archers are in a perfect position to shoot into the back of the blob. Yeah, like this sort of flank over here where the Sauron's Will came through. More infantry as well. Compromised the archer line. Snaga archers routing. And Angmar is not going to last too much longer, to be honest with you. Decent amount of damage done to Mordor, to be fair. Mordor is not in perfect condition, but Mordor will probably be fairly okay with how this engagement has gone. Like they've definitely got enough units here in the late game to try and go on and win the battle, which is key. I mean, if it was just like a handful of like orc maulers that they have left, it would be obviously not so great for them. They'd have to try and hide and maybe come in the late game to try and win. But as it is, Melkor's Chosen still alive. A lot of Morannon units alive to form a front line. They probably still have elite units in here as well. Indeed they do. The Temple Execution is still pretty healthy. Olag Kai are in there. And Angmar have been defeated. I feel bad because I feel as though this is going to be the excuse Corrigan needs to go back to his old ways. But it was neat to see. Even if this is the only time we ever get to see Corrigan on the front foot, it was neat to see. Troll Drummers, meanwhile, they're actually engaged in melee, which is not ideal for Clatati. Like, the Troll Drummers, of all the trolls, other than perhaps the Catapult Crewmen, are not as good in melee. Although, to be fair, it's only civilians and Lake Town Infantry. Like, they're so poor in melee, both of these units. I mean, the Lake Town Infantry are okay light line infantry, but generally speaking, they need to be fighting alongside another unit before they can sort of do what they want to do. Alongside civilians, like, that's not really going to be ideal for them, to be honest with you. Depleted Maulers. Orc archers and Morannon archers trying to do their thing. I mean, certainly in a skirmish fight with Dale, Mordor are going to lose, but Dale's attentions are now very much divided. And here on the front line, Alcarondas Legion facing off against a combination of Dalian spears and shield wall and civilians, and Dale holding for the time being. Like, their numbers are going to be enough here. One unit of Alcarondas Legion not going to be enough to break through that very densely packed front line, but it has to be said that Umbar is keeping a little bit back in reserve. And it is also worth saying as well, I think the Earls of Dale were trying to make something happen over here. There's a lot of corpses of the Earls of Dale over there, but clearly whatever it was, it didn't work because they are now routing, and it was bold to do that anyway. I mean, Umbar's cavalry force is still in good shape. It's unfortunate, I suppose, for Umbar that the engagement in this battle is likely to take place in and amongst those farmsteads and that fort there. Because if it was on a more open field, the Umbar cavalry would be absolutely devastating, the warlords especially with their lancers. Over here, meanwhile, Orc Javelins and Morannon infantry. I mean, technically Angmar is still up. Their general here, facing off against the Morannons and the Orc Javelins. Can Mordor rally and deal with Dale? I mean, I actually think Mordor is in a better position than Dale here, because Dale is caught between Mordor and Umbar at this point. This, of course, all is going to be pretty good, I think, for Umbar ultimately, because Mordor is still going to be taking losses from Dale. Already had to go up against Angmar. There goes Mordor's general as well. Umbar's army may be smaller, but I feel as though they're going to be in pretty good shape in the late game, relatively speaking. There's a lot of arrows coming in from the Morroquendi bows, and the Lake Town infantry, and the Dalian Royal Guard, actually. It is interesting to me, actually, that Dale have siphoned off a lot of their archers to try and shoot Mordor. Mordor, I think, it wouldn't be the worst idea to pull back at this point. There's no need to be hyper-aggressive against Dale, because advancing into Dale, you're going to take damage doing so against the archers. In particular, something like the Morroquendi bows are dangerous with those poison arrows to an Orc faction. That was Angmar's general. And that was Angmar gone. Credit to Corrigan, though. That was Corrigan being aggressive. It was true. Aguilar was not lying to me. It has happened at long last. Umbar sort of... Yeah, I mean, at this point, Dale, I think, have left too little in their backlines, and with a full committal of all of Umbar's heavy infantry, these spears that were sort of guarding the rear are not going to be able to hold on any longer, and I think Dale committed a little bit too much against Mordor. Personally, just a couple of infantry units to make sure Mordor couldn't immediately advance on them, and also a couple of archer units to shoot into them would have been enough. The rest needed to face off against Umbar, I think. As it is, they're going to struggle. Yeah, like Dalian Spearmen. Alcarondas Legion actually pulling back, and that's interesting. Sort of pulling back a little bit and then pulling Dale out of a dense formation, and now they're going to go back in. Very nice indeed. Dalian Bowmen are continuing to fire at the Corsair crossbows, I think. Well, actually, no, they're going after that very depleted unit of Balagair archers. They need to go after the crossbows at this point. Crossbows are going after the Dalian Paladins. And that's the last thing you want to see as Dale. Dalian Paladins are so useful in melee, especially against the more heavily armoured Umbar troops. Last thing you want is to lose them to crossbowmen, especially crossbowmen that are as fragile to archers as that. Like, Dale should be well equipped to deal with the crossbows whenever they pop out. As it is, though, you can see Umbar moving around the side. Dale do have units ready to stop the advance. Balakath Axguard held in place by Barding Herd, but there's some support from the Balagair archers. There's another unit of crossbows. The Harbingers are on the way forward. More Axguard are here as well. The Morroquendi Pikes are actually retreating as well, so the Barding Herd are going to have to do it all on their lonesome. Which they won't be feeling too thrilled about, to say the least. What have we got back there? Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Yeah, Dale, I think they've been caught on their heels a little bit here. They don't have enough units on any one of their front lines to withstand here. And I feel as though in an attempt to maybe engage with Mordor and prevent themselves from being sandwiched, they've kind of done the exact opposite. They've drawn Umbar in by not leaving enough troops to defend against Umbar, and Mordor now has to commit everything they have left against Dale just in order to keep the attack going. So, in what I would assume was an attempt to stop this from happening, Dale have just hastened it, really. Narrow Arrow Sentinels on the front line. They're a stronger unit than the Morroquendi Pikes as well, so this this front line from Dale, it's only a matter of time at this point before it falls apart, I think. I do appreciate that Sigma was proactive, though. I feared, based on his initial deployment, that he would be one of those players to just sort of sit in one position and just try and make it an anti-fun game. Dalian Bowmen charging out to try and deal with the Corsair crossbows, but unsupported, they immediately get flattened by the Umbar cavalry. Any excuse to use their cavalry in a more open setting is going to be one that Umbar most certainly takes, and that unit of Dalian Bowmen was almost instantly flattened by a joint charge from both the Umbar Knights. But yeah, Dale at the very least tried to make something happen, but I feel as though the execution was a little bit lacking. Not necessarily the wrong idea, just the proportions were wrong. Lake Town Infantry fighting on the front line. I mean, at this point, to be fair, I mean, Dale's archers have done so much damage to Mordor that their infantry over here is actually doing okay. But ultimately this is just going to play into Umbar's hands. They need their archers to stop shooting at Mordor. Mordor at this point are not as big a threat as Umbar are by a long way. In fact, if Mordor and Dale were wise, they would stop engaging with one another entirely and try to double team Umbar at this point. But I don't feel as though they are wise. I feel as though both sides have spilt too much of one another's blood at this point to reconcile in such a way. Dalian Royal Guard were going to come forward, but yeah, I mean, moving out too far from your defences to try and engage with something like the Umbar crossbows is going to be disastrous, because the Umbar cav is going to do so much work if that happens. Dalian Paladins did come down here, but they're getting shot once again by crossbows and by archers. Unit of Axguard in reserve, and to be fair, with all the range support, this Balakath Axguard, the Phalanx is not going to help. The AP as well from the Balakath Axguard is going to be a very useful thing. Dale are still holding on, but I don't feel as though that's going to last for too much longer. Yeah, you can see over here that the Morroquendi Pikes all alone at this point. Umbar, this wing of their army is going to flood forwards, which includes the Harbingers, who actually doubled back to take this little hill fort. And now they're going to move forwards. Dalian Paladin's not going to arrive on scene quick enough to save this front line by any stretch of the imagination. What have we got going on over here? Corsair crossbowmen moving forwards as well. Dalian Royal Guard are over here. Dalian Bowmen. The balance of forces is evenly matched. Victory is a distinct possibility. Victory is definitely a distinct possibility for Umbar at this point, I think, because they're going to defeat Dale, and Mordor is not going to have enough left, I think, to deal with Umbar. Umbar had a small army, but I mean, the elite nature of it means that stuff like Orc Archers and Moran on Guard are not going to be enough. Lake Town Infantry are routing, so Dale now have lost on this front line. Obviously, the Temple Executioners being committed alongside some more Moran on infantry was always going to be a bit of a problem there. Some Moran on archers in melee as well. They're going to be able to dismantle those Barding Herd. Morroquendi bow. So still Dale not letting go of this Mordor assault. And to be fair, this one wasn't so bad, but he committed too much over here against Mordor. It was an error in judgment, I think, from Sigma ultimately. And here you can see Dalian Paladins completely surrounded and they're getting ripped apart by the Umbar heavy infantrymen. And yeah, I mean, I feel as though, partially by circumstance, like Aguilar, he did what he had to do, he played well of course, but I feel as though most of the reason he's won has to be because Dale didn't engage against him enough. Like, no one engaged against Umbar enough to really make them pay for their smaller army focus here. And in the end, like, the way the battle went just played into Umbar's hands so much. Aguilar played well enough, of course, but the main contributing factor was everyone else not really engaging against Umbar as much as they should. Dale have done damage to Umbar, to be fair, but nowhere near enough. Mordor are going to be over here. I mean, here now the Umbar cavalry is going to be free to charge into what's left of Cletati's Mordor army, and I feel as though Cletati played well. Like, he dealt with Corrigan's rush well. Like, he did good. He surrounded it. He took damage doing so, of course, but that's to be expected when you're facing off against Angmar aggression. I feel as though he did well enough as well at dealing with the fact that Dale came after him in quite a big way. And when that happens, like, your chance of winning in a free-for-all decreased dramatically. So, considering the hand he was dealt, I actually think Cletati did quite well here. Corrigan, I mean, for a first time being aggressive, that's pretty much what you would expect. Like, the army composition, I feel maybe he didn't intend to be aggressive in this battle. I feel as though the way he was going, maybe he wanted to go over here in this sort of mountainous bit and sort of do what he normally does. But in the end, he sort of saw the fact that maybe he was going to be pincered, so he sort of panicked and attacked Umbar, or Mordor, I should say. And in the end, I mean, it went about as well as you could expect. I'm glad that he was aggressive, though. And he did do some damage to Mordor as well, which really made Cletati's job more difficult in the late game, but it is what it is. And Dale, again, I don't feel as though anyone played badly. I just feel as though the judgment, like on the micro scale, I don't think anyone did anything too wrong, other than maybe the Earls going in against the crossbows and the like. And also, I mean, Corrigan, to be fair, on a micro scale did quite well. I think it was more on a macro scale that, even then, I feel as though it was just a case of composition for Corrigan. Like, it was too many archers. Like, if you're going to rush, you can't have that many low-tier archers. You're not going to be able to defend them all, and they're not going to do enough damage to make their presence worthwhile. Warlords of Umbar continuing to charge in, dealing with what's left of Dale. The Dalian Royal Guard are still over here. One lone swordsman having to deal with a bunch of filthy Corsairs and a bunch of scary Black Numenorians, wielding those rather strange looking axes. And there he goes. Victorious against Dale there. I mean, to be fair, Melkor's Chosen still over here. That may be the last of them, however, because the Shield Guard are here. Alcarondas Faithful can sandwich them in as well. Not great for them. And there you can see as well, surrounding the Temple Executioners meant that they fell away pretty quickly, actually, under the weight of the Umbar elites. And there's also some Blackshot Dragon Slayers still over there, but they're going to take a downhill charge from the Warlords, which is going to completely destroy them. And there goes the Dalian General. A Dunine Shield Guard victory seems certain. They're going to pull the final Melkor's Chosen rider off their mount. And that was Mordor. So Mordor did technically fall before Dale, I think, because the Blackshot Dragon Slayers didn't actually all die off the charge, which surprises me. But there they go. Or is that Dale gone? Well, there we go. And yeah, Cletati with the most amount of kills, which, considering everyone wanted a piece of him, really, at some point in this battle, is probably why. And I feel as though, from a moral perspective, we could say Cletati did very well in this battle. But the two things that I would have changed, one would have been Corrigan's composition. Like, it just wasn't well suited for a rush. Angmar's archers are well known for being, in terms of quality, the worst in the game. So bringing that many is a puzzling thing, especially if you want to be aggressive. Angmar, if you want to be defensive, that's a different matter entirely. You can, and you do need to bring quite a lot of cheap archers if that's going to be the case. Which may have been Corrigan's original plan. Like, it may not have been his original plan to be this aggressive, in which case his composition makes a lot more sense. Having said that, I feel as though if you are going to be aggressive with Angmar, a couple of archers, no, I would only go one archer to be honest with you, but a couple is justifiable. But you need more in terms of your upfront. Like, a lot of cheaper units as well, which Angmar can do as long as you support them properly. Sacrificing a couple of those archers, however, to bring some higher end units would have been better, I think. Because as it was, they blobbed up a little bit too much, and Mordor did very well, honestly, to surround, contain, and ultimately destroy Angmar. And composition played into that, but also Mordor playing well also played into that. And also, as well, Dale's macro decisions, I think, were not really what was required in this battle. Like, they needed to take Umbar far more seriously as a threat. They were far too eager to try and go after Mordor, I think, which to an extent is right for the reasons I said. Like, if they allowed Mordor to defeat Angmar soundly like they were going to do, they would have found themselves caught between two armies. So to do some damage with archers at range and maybe to send the odd unit of infantry to block their advance was the right thing to do. They committed far too much of their strength going after an already wounded animal in Mordor and leaving a genuine predator in Umbar to come forward and just ultimately overpower them. Not overwhelm them, because Umbar's army was relatively small, especially compared to everyone else's. But in terms of quality, Umbar had too much to just let them be like that. And that was the decision that ultimately won Agalar the game. Agalar just did what he had to do. He moved forward, advanced in a very typical fashion, and ultimately defeated Dale, who didn't take him seriously enough, I don't think, which was a big mistake. But composition was okay, and apart from that, like, the attack against Mordor was actually going relatively well. So, I mean, it's not as if he did everything poorly, but also on a micro scale, I feel as though he at least tried to sort of right his wrongs, as it were. But by the time he was doing that, it was obviously too late. Which gave Umbar the win. Umbar deserved the win for the most part purely through circumstance. I feel as though I would have liked to see Mordor win the fight, considering how well they did in a difficult situation. But obviously in a free-for-all, if the deck is stacked against you, it's very, very rare that you're going to win a battle like that. But obviously the main event here was Corrigan being aggressive. He may have been the first player to fall, but I mean, take a picture of this because it's likely never going to happen again. Burn it into your memory. Corrigan rushed with Angmar. Wild times indeed. But let's see what did the damage for Umbar. Umbar didn't get the most kills because obviously, you know, they came in later on to the action. Alcarondas Legion did very well, as did the Corsair Crossbows. Warlords of Umbar obviously getting a high kill count with the Alcarondas Faithful. I mean, a lot of those kills, to be fair, were those two units of isolated Barrow-wights. The Barrow-wights could have made a difference on the front line against Mordor, to be fair. I feel as though all it would have done, though, was delay Mordor even more. Like, they're not going to turn the fight around to the extent that they would have needed in terms of damage to Barrow-wights. So even if they had arrived, I still feel as though Mordor would have won. But obviously, padding their kill counts quite a lot, the cavalry units with those units. But later on, they still obviously dealt with any stragglers that came too far away from the more confined areas of the hill fort and the village, or the little farming hamlet, as it is. Rest of the units, so Balakath Axgard, they did okay, considering the fact they were up against Barding Herd, and obviously that's a difficult engagement because of the phalanx. But yeah, I mean, Corsair Crossbows, Alcarondas Legion, heavy infantry, they came forward and they overwhelmed very quickly and distributed the kills quite evenly among them, other than the cavalry, of course. So yeah, big thank you to Agalar for sending this one in. I think it was Agalar anyway. Was it Artorias? No, it must have been Agalar, because we're seeing this from his perspective. Or is it? Never mind, regardless. Thank you to Agalar for playing in this battle, and I assume sending this one in to me. Big thank you to all the players as well. Big thank you to Corrigan for being aggressive. It's nice to see a rare sight. And big thank you to Clatati and Sigma as well for being a part of this battle as well. Nice map. I mean, for like a 1v1, v1v1 free-for-all is maybe not the best showcase of a map of this size and complexity, because really what we got to see was a little bit of action on the open field, and then this little strip of the battlefield was where all of the action pretty much took place. I feel as though a nice 4v4 siege on this battle at some point in the future would not be a bad thing. Regardless, next is going to be, I'm going to sort of take a little break and then crack on with recording Sin's Adunheim Outpost battle, and then maybe if I have time before I leave later on, as I said, record another one. But that's the loose plan, as it were. But yeah, regardless, I think a channel update is probably going to be forthcoming in the next week or so, just to try and hammer out some sort of plan for the near future. Because I feel as though that is going to be necessary. Don't want to overdo it on the channel updates, obviously, because I did do 2 in quick succession just before the new year, and I feel as though it's only really worth doing if you do have something genuine to say. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not so sure about that, actually. Closer to when Mountain Blade Bannerlord is due to release, maybe we'll do that. But unfortunately, I think on Bannerlord's actual release day, which I think is the 17th of March, that's the week that I'm going to be away. So the initial release, I actually don't think I'll be around for, which is a real shame. But Bannerlord is still something that I want to get into. So again, we'll see. That's matters for a channel update video, like I said, and that will not be wedged at the end of one of these battle replays. So yeah, next up will be a Dunheim Outpost. Following that, something else, again probably from the standard build. I do have some stuff from the hot fix, or cold fix it's called as well, but probably leave that for another recording session, I think. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me, whatever is next.